I'm Nicole, 32 years old, and a certified accountant. Never in my wildest nightmares did I imagine opening my mailbox to find court papers filed by my own parents, all because I bought a house. After 12 years of working nonstop, surviving on ramen noodles, and saving every penny, my reward was a lawsuit from the very people who raised me. Our relationship was always complicated when it came to money, but this was something else entirely. Before I dive into this unbelievable story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you want to hear more stories about family dynamics gone terribly wrong. Growing up in the Johnson household meant living under strict financial rules that bordered on obsessive. My father Thomas was always the financial mastermind, while my mother Sandra simply followed his lead without question. Every dollar that entered our home was meticulously tracked in my father's infamous ledger books. These weren't just ordinary budget records. They were comprehensive documents where he noted every penny spent, who spent it, and whether he deemed the expense necessary or frivolous. When I was just 7 years old, I received $20 from my grandmother for my birthday. Excited, I planned to buy a stuffed animal I'd been eyeing at the mall. But before I could even put the money in my tiny unicorn purse, my father intercepted. "Nicole, you need to learn about money management early," he said, taking the bill from my hand. $15 goes to your college fund, and you can keep $5. Even that remaining $5 came with conditions about how and when I could spend it. This pattern continued throughout my childhood. Any money gifted to me for birthdays, holidays, or good grades was immediately confiscated and managed by my parents. They claimed they were teaching me financial responsibility, but in reality, they were teaching me that I had no autonomy when it came to money. Our house was never our own. We moved from rental to rental throughout my childhood, sometimes staying in one place for just a year before moving to another. Despite both my parents having stable jobs, my father as an insurance claims adjuster, and my mother as a medical office administrator, they insisted that owning a home was a financial trap and money pit. "Only fools buy houses," my father would proclaim during dinner. "Smart people rent and invest the difference." I believed him completely until I was about 14. And noticed that our neighbors who owned their homes seemed far more financially secure than we were. When I mentioned this observation, my father launched into a 30-minute lecture about visible wealth versus actual wealth, and how homeowners were slaves to their mortgages. By 16, I was eager to gain some financial independence, and found a job at the local grocery store. I worked weekends and some evenings after school, carefully balancing my work and study schedule. With my first paycheck came my first major financial shock. My father sat me down at the kitchen table and explained his family contribution system. "Since you're living under our roof, eating our food, and using our utilities, 70% of your earnings goes to the family fund," he stated matter-of-factly. 20% goes to your college fund that your mother and I manage, and you can keep 10% for your discretionary spending. I remember the knot forming in my stomach as I reluctantly handed over 70% of my hard-earned money. My father assured me the family fund portion was being saved for household expenses and emergencies. The college fund portion, he promised, would be waiting for me when I graduated high school. The summer before my senior year, I needed to pay for a college application workshop. When I asked to use some of my college fund money, my father's response was the first truly heartbreaking moment in my financial relationship with my parents. "That money isn't liquid right now, Nicole. It's been invested. Taking it out would incur penalties." When I pressed for details about these investments, the answers were vague and inconsistent. Sometimes the money was in CDs, Other times in mutual funds, occasionally in private investments my father had access to through work connections. It didn't take long for me to realize the uncomfortable truth: the money was gone. My parents had been using my earnings to supplement their own spending habits while maintaining the illusion of saving for my future. My father drove a new car every 3 years. My mother had an extensive collection of designer handbags she rarely used. Yet our rental homes were always modest, and any request for school trips, music lessons, or sports equipment was met with dramatic sighs about financial hardship. The disconnect between their personal spending and our family's supposed financial limitations was jarring. By the time I graduated high school, the sense of betrayal was firmly rooted in my heart. Not only had my parents taken most of my earnings under false pretenses, but they had also indoctrinated me with financial philosophies that served their needs rather than preparing me for independence. The money that was supposedly being saved for my education had vanished into the abyss of their personal expenses, and I was left facing the prospect of college with empty pockets and a deeply damaged sense of trust. When college acceptance letters arrived, my parents had very specific ideas about my future. My father insisted I pursue law, claiming it was the most financially prudent career path. Lawyers always have job security, he'd say, and the return on investment for law school is unmatched. But I had discovered a passion and aptitude for numbers during high school, particularly in my accounting classes. The orderly nature of balancing books and the ethical framework of proper financial management appealed to me in ways my father's secretive money habits never did. When I announced my intention to major in accounting, the household temperature dropped 20 degrees. "Accountants are just glorified bookkeepers," my father scoffed. "You'll waste your potential and cap your earnings." Despite his disapproval, I enrolled at State University with a major in accounting. My parents' response was swift and definitive: if I wouldn't follow their career advice, they wouldn't provide financial support. I wasn't entirely surprised given their track record with my own money, but the reality of funding college entirely on my own was daunting. The financial aid office became my second home that first semester. I applied for every scholarship, grant, and work-study opportunity available. My course schedule was arranged around my work hours, not the other way around. Mornings were for classes, afternoons for the university bookstore, work-study job evenings for the campus call center, and late nights for a local 24-hour diner on weekends. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't often afford. My first semester living arrangements were equally humble. The cheapest housing option was a triple room in the oldest dormitory on campus. My roommates were Katie, a nursing student from Colorado, and Jasmine, who dropped out after 6 weeks. Katie quickly became more than just a roommate. She was my first real friend who understood my situation without judgment. My parents saved for my brother's education, but not mine. She confided one night as we both studied under desk lamps at 2 a.m. They said nursing was a waste for a woman who would just get married and have babies anyway. Katie and I formed a bond of solidarity in our shared experience of parental financial abandonment. We split bulk food purchases, shared textbooks when possible, and covered for each other when work shifts conflicted with important lectures. We became experts at stretching ramen noodles into something resembling a balanced meal, adding frozen vegetables and eggs when we could afford them. My second year brought a critical turning point in my financial education. Professor Anthony Wilson, who taught intermediate accounting, took notice of my consistent top performance despite my obvious exhaustion. After class one day, he invited me to his office hours. "You have a natural talent for this field," he said, "but you're running yourself into the ground. Have you considered applying for the accounting department's merit scholarship?" I hadn't known such a specific scholarship existed. Professor Wilson not only helped me apply, but also wrote a glowing recommendation. The scholarship covered half my tuition for the remaining years, allowing me to drop one of my 3 jobs and occasionally sleep more than 4 hours a night. More importantly, Professor Wilson became my mentor in ways that transcended academics. He taught me practical financial wisdom that contradicted much of what my parents had instilled in me. Where my father claimed credit was always bad, Professor Wilson explained the responsible use of credit to build a financial history. Where my parents insisted homeownership was for fools, he shared how his modest home had appreciated and provided stability during economic downturns. Financial security isn't about following rigid rules, he explained. It's about making informed choices that align with your values and long-term goals. This concept was revolutionary to me. The idea that money could be a tool for creating the life I wanted, rather than a scarce resource to be hoarded and controlled, shifted my entire perspective. I began studying personal finance alongside my accounting coursework, devouring books on investment strategies and wealth building. My newfound financial knowledge led to increasing conflicts with my parents during holiday visits. When I mentioned opening a Roth IRA with my small savings from my reduced work schedule, my father dismissed it as gambling in the rigged stock market. When I shared Professor Wilson's insights about building credit responsibly, my mother warned me I was being brainwashed by banking propaganda. The final breaking point came during spring break of junior year. I'd stayed on campus to work extra shifts, and my parents made a surprise visit. What they really wanted was access to my bank accounts. "We're concerned about your financial decisions," my father explained, sliding a form across the table at the campus coffee shop. "We want to be added as authorized users on your accounts to monitor your spending and savings." I stared at the form in disbelief. I'm 20 years old. I'm supporting myself entirely. Why would you need access to my accounts? "Because you're making naive choices based on textbook theories," he replied. "You need real-world guidance." When I refused, my mother began crying, claiming my financial rebellion was tearing the family apart. My father suggested my independence was a sign of selfishness and ingratitude. I held firm, and they left campus without speaking to me for the next 3 months. That summer, instead of returning home, I subleased a cheap apartment with Katie and worked full-time at an accounting internship that Professor Wilson had helped me secure. For the first time, I began seriously contemplating a future where I owned my own home, directly contradicting everything my parents had taught me about property ownership being a trap. The seed of this dream took root, and I began researching mortgage requirements and saving strategies while completing my degree. By graduation, I had managed not only to survive financially on my own, but also to build a small emergency fund and retirement account. I had secured a position at a respected accounting firm, and my relationship with my parents had settled into a distant détente where we avoided discussing money entirely. I didn't realize then that this uneasy peace was merely the calm before the storm. My entry-level position at Harrington and Associates came with a starting salary that seemed astronomical compared to my college earnings. Even after budgeting for a modest one-bedroom apartment, professional clothing, and student loan payments, I had more discretionary income than ever before. The temptation to upgrade my lifestyle was strong, especially when I saw how my colleagues lived. But the memory of financial insecurity was still fresh. Instead of splurging, I created a detailed financial plan with a single, overarching goal: homeownership. Based on housing prices, salary projections, and savings rates, I calculated it would take approximately 10 years to save enough for a down payment on a modest home in a decent neighborhood. The plan required continuing to live like a student despite my professional salary. My apartment was furnished primarily from thrift stores and marketplace finds. My wardrobe consisted of a capsule collection of mix-and-match professional attire purchased during sales. I meal prepped religiously to avoid takeout temptations and tracked every expense in a budgeting app. When colleagues went out for happy hours or weekend trips, I often declined using work commitments as an excuse, rather than admitting I was saving nearly 70% of my take-home pay. Katie, who had become a nurse at the university hospital, remained my closest friend and occasional voice of reason. "You need some balance, Nicole," she'd remind me, during our monthly coffee dates, the one regular indulgence I permitted myself. "Saving for the future is important, but so is living now." She was right, but finding that balance was challenging when the goal of homeownership felt so important. It represented everything my parents had denied me: stability, autonomy, and the tangible proof that their financial philosophy had been wrong. Every dollar saved was a small act of rebellion against their teachings. 3 years into my career, I met Michael at a professional development workshop. He was a software engineer who approached finances with the same analytical mindset I did, but with a healthier perspective on enjoying the present while building for the future. Our first date was a picnic in the park where we bonded over spreadsheets and retirement calculators, finding romance in compound interest projections. "I've never met anyone who gets as excited about tax-advantaged accounts as I do," he confessed, looking both amused and delighted. Michael understood my home-buying goal without judgment. He had his own financial targets and respected my determination. When we eventually became serious, we maintained separate finances while supporting each other's goals. He helped me find small ways to enjoy life without derailing my savings plan, like hiking trips instead of expensive vacations, and home-cooked special dinners instead of fine dining. My career progressed steadily, with promotions every few years. Each salary increase went directly to my house fund rather than lifestyle inflation. By year 6, I had been promoted to senior accountant, with a corresponding pay bump that accelerated my timeline. My relationship with Michael deepened, though we chose not to move in together since my extreme saving habits would have imposed unfair restrictions on his lifestyle. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents entered a new and troubling phase. After years of minimal contact, they suddenly began calling more frequently. The reason became clear during a holiday visit: they wanted money. "We're having some temporary cash flow problems," my father explained over dinner at their rental home, notably more upscale than any we'd lived in during my childhood. "Just a bridge loan until some investments mature. 20,000 would cover it." The request stunned me. Not only was it a significant amount, but there was no acknowledgement of the irony in asking me for financial help after years of controlling and mismanaging my money. When I asked for details about their situation, the explanations were vague and reminiscent of the excuses they'd given about my college fund years ago. "I need to think about it," I said carefully, knowing that an outright refusal would trigger a dramatic response. Back home, I discussed the situation with Michael and Katie. "This feels like history repeating itself," I admitted. "I'm afraid if I give them money, it will never end." After careful consideration, I declined their request, offering instead to help them create a budget and financial plan. My father's response was cold fury, accusing me of throwing their sacrifices back in their faces. My mother called in tears, claiming they might lose their rental home. I stood firm, and eventually the crisis mysteriously resolved itself without my financial intervention. 6 months later, they called with another request, this time for $15,000 for medical expenses they wouldn't specify. Again, I declined. 3 months after that, it was $30,000 for a business opportunity my father refused to detail. The pattern was clear. My increasing financial stability had transformed me in their eyes from a source of money to exploit through control to a source of money to exploit through emotional manipulation. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when a mutual acquaintance mentioned running into my parents at an expensive resort in Florida during the same period they were supposedly facing financial ruin. This revelation coincided with a major milestone in my career, a promotion to department manager with a substantial raise and bonus. After 8 years of disciplined saving and career advancement, my house fund had grown significantly. The housing market in our area was competitive, but not impossible, and mortgage rates were relatively favorable. I began seriously researching neighborhoods, attending open houses on weekends, and consulting with real estate agents. Each step brought me closer to the goal I'd been working toward for nearly a decade, while simultaneously increasing the distance between my parents and me. I made the conscious decision not to inform them of my house hunting efforts, knowing their response would only be negative and potentially interfering. By year 12 of my career at age 32, the pieces finally aligned. My savings were sufficient for a 20% down payment, plus closing costs, and an emergency fund. My credit score was excellent, thanks to years of careful financial management. The promotion to department manager had further strengthened my application. I was ready to make my dream of homeownership a reality, despite everything my parents had taught me about it being the worst financial decision a person could make. The moment I received pre-approval for my mortgage was surreal. After 12 years of sacrifice and discipline, I held in my hands the official confirmation that a bank believed in my financial responsibility enough to lend me hundreds of thousands of dollars. I remember sitting in my car outside the mortgage broker's office, staring at the paperwork and feeling a strange mixture of elation and vindication. Michael was the first person I called. "Congratulations, house hunter," he said warmly. "This calls for a celebration. A reasonably priced celebration, of course." That weekend, we celebrated with a bottle of champagne on the balcony of my apartment, toasting to the next chapter of my life. The following day, the serious business of house hunting began in earnest. I had a clear vision of what I wanted: a modest 2-bedroom home in a safe neighborhood with reasonable commuting distance to my office. My real estate agent, Julia, was refreshingly straightforward about the process. In this market, you might need to make offers on several houses before one gets accepted, she warned. Try not to get emotionally attached too quickly. That advice proved difficult to follow. The first few houses we viewed had significant issues hiding behind their freshly painted walls, which my cautious nature couldn't overlook. Others were perfect, but received multiple offers well above asking price within hours of listing. After 6 weeks of searching and 3 rejected offers, I began to worry that my dream might remain just that. Then Julia called with news about a property that hadn't been officially listed yet. "The owners are relocating for work and need a quick, drama-free sale," she explained. "It's a 2-story with a small backyard in Riverside. Not flashy, but solid construction and good bones. We can see it tomorrow before it hits the market." The house was exactly what I'd been looking for. Built in the 90s, it had been well maintained by the current owners with updated electrical and plumbing. The layout was practical with a combined living and dining area, a functional kitchen, 2 bedrooms upstairs, and a small fenced backyard where I could imagine summer barbecues and maybe even a garden. The neighborhood was established with mature trees and a mix of families and professionals. I made an offer that evening slightly above asking price, but within my budget. After a brief negotiation about the closing timeline, the sellers accepted. The inspection revealed only minor issues that they agreed to fix, and suddenly the home buying process that had seemed so elusive was moving forward with surprising smoothness. Michael accompanied me to all the meetings offering moral support and a second set of eyes on the countless documents requiring signatures. "You're really doing this," he said during the final walkthrough. 12 years of ramen noodles and missed happy hours are about to pay off. Closing day arrived with little fanfare. I signed my name dozens of times, paid the down payment and closing costs that represented years of disciplined saving, and received the keys to my first home. As we walked through the empty rooms that afternoon, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and peace. This space was mine, earned through my own efforts despite every obstacle. Throughout the entire process, I had deliberately avoided mentioning anything about the house to my parents. Our contact had become infrequent after their third attempt to borrow money, limited to occasional holiday texts and brief surface-level phone conversations on birthdays. I had no intention of giving them ammunition to criticize or undermine this achievement. The universe, however, had other plans. 2 weeks after moving in, while I was still surrounded by boxes and figuring out which light switches controlled which fixtures, my phone rang with my mother's number. "Nicole," she began, without preamble, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "We just had the most interesting conversation with Barbara Thompson." My stomach dropped. Barbara Thompson was the mother of my high school classmate Amanda and lived 3 streets over from my new house. In our small city, such coincidences weren't uncommon. "She mentioned running into you at the hardware store," my mother continued. "She congratulated us on your new house in Riverside. Imagine our surprise to hear about such a major life decision from a woman we barely know." I took a deep breath, trying to formulate a response that wouldn't escalate the situation. "I was planning to tell you once I was settled," I lied, knowing they would have tried to talk me out of the purchase had I mentioned it earlier. "We'll be there in 30 minutes, my father interjected, apparently on speakerphone. "Text us the address." The call ended before I could object. Those 30 minutes were a blur of anxiety and hurried cleaning. Michael offered to stay for moral support, but I knew his presence would only complicate an already volatile situation. "I need to handle this myself," I told him, "but keep your phone on." My parents arrived exactly 30 minutes later, my father's silver SUV pulling into my new driveway with deliberate slowness. They examined the exterior of the house with critical eyes before ringing the doorbell as if they were visiting a stranger rather than their daughter. The moment they stepped inside, the interrogation began. My father paced the living room, firing questions about purchase price, interest rate, and property taxes. My mother moved through the rooms with an expression of barely concealed disapproval, running her finger along surfaces as if checking for dust and making small huffing sounds at my modest furniture. "I can't believe you did this without consulting us," my father finally said, his voice rising. "After everything we taught you about the financial trap of home ownership, this is exactly the kind of impulsive decision we tried to protect you from." "Impulsive," I echoed in disbelief. "I've been saving for this for 12 years. I've researched the market for 3 years. I put 20% down and got a fixed-rate mortgage well within my budget. You've been planning this behind our backs for years." My mother's voice was wounded, as if I'd been plotting something criminal rather than a standard adult milestone. "I didn't tell you because I knew this would be your reaction," I said, gesturing to their angry expressions. "I'm 32 years old. I don't need permission or approval for my financial decisions." My father's face reddened. "After everything we've done for you, all the financial wisdom we tried to impart, and this is how you repay us, by rejecting our guidance and wasting your money on this liability." He spat the last word like a curse. The argument escalated as they moved from criticizing the house itself to questioning my judgment, my career choices, and ultimately my character. Each room they inspected triggered new complaints. The kitchen was too small. The backyard would be a maintenance nightmare. The neighborhood was either going downhill or pretentiously overpriced, depending on which parent was speaking. The final blow came when we reached the second bedroom, which I had set up as a home office. My father stared at my organized desk and bookshelves with narrowed eyes. "You've done well for yourself," he said, his tone shifting suddenly. "This career we didn't want for you has clearly been profitable, and now you have assets." The way he emphasized the last word sent a chill down my spine. "I think it's time you showed some gratitude for the sacrifices we made raising you," he continued. "We invested everything in your future, and now that investment should provide returns." I stared at him in shock. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "We're your parents, Nicole. We're entitled to share in your success. We estimate that raising you cost approximately $400,000. Now that you're acquiring valuable property, it's time to discuss repayment." The conversation descended into threats and ultimatums. They wanted me to either sell the house and give them half the proceeds or take out a home equity loan to repay my debt to them. When I refused both options, my father delivered the threat that would change everything. "If you won't acknowledge your financial obligations to us voluntarily, we have other options. Don't forget that your mother and I have detailed records of every penny we spent on you. The courts will recognize our investment in your future." They left with a final warning I had 1 week to do the right thing before they would take legal action. As their car pulled away, I stood in the doorway of my new home, the achievement that represented years of hard work now tainted by their toxic entitlement. I didn't know then that they were entirely serious about their threat, or how soon I would find myself facing them not just across my living room, but across a courtroom. Exactly 8 days after my parents' ultimatum, a courier delivered an envelope that would turn my world upside down. The official court summons felt heavy in my hands, the formal legal language stating that Thomas and Sandra Johnson were suing their daughter Nicole Johnson for financial compensation related to parental investment and unjust enrichment. I sat on my front steps for nearly an hour, the papers trembling in my hands, trying to comprehend the reality that my own parents were actually taking me to court over buying a house. The lawsuit claimed they were entitled to 50% of my home's value as return on investment for financial and emotional support provided during formative years. They were asking the court to either force the sale of my home or require me to pay them half its appraised value. The legal complaint included a detailed accounting of alleged expenses, food, clothing, shelter, education, medical care, transportation, extracurricular activities, and even an assigned monetary value for emotional labor and life guidance. Each category had estimated monthly costs, multiplied by 18 years with compound interest applied. The total sum they claimed to have invested in me was just over $400,000. When I finally managed to call Michael, my voice was barely recognizable through the tears. "They actually did it," I choked out. "They're suing me. My own parents are suing me for buying a house." Michael arrived within 20 minutes, bringing Katie with him. They found me still sitting on the steps, unable to move past the shock of such a profound betrayal. "This is insane," Katie said after reading through the documents. "Parents don't get to bill their children for raising them. That's not how family works." Michael was already researching on his phone. "You need a lawyer, Nicole. A good one. This might be a ridiculous lawsuit, but you still have to respond properly." The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in my career and began contacting attorneys. After 3 consultations with lawyers, who seemed either overly dismissive or eager to escalate the family drama, I found Jennifer Chang. Her measured response and clear expertise in family law made her the obvious choice. I've seen cases like this before, Jennifer explained during our first meeting. They're rarely successful, but they can be emotionally draining and expensive to defend. Parents occasionally try to claim financial compensation from adult children, especially when substantial assets are involved. The courts generally recognize that parents have a legal obligation to support their minor children without expectation of repayment. Her confidence was reassuring, but the process ahead remained daunting. "We'll need to document your financial independence," she continued. "Prove that you purchased the house entirely with your own earned income and ideally demonstrate that your parents didn't provide significant financial support during your adulthood or contribute to your home purchase." The following weeks became a blur of legal preparations and emotional turmoil. I took a week of personal leave from work to gather documentation tax returns from my college jobs, scholarship, and financial aid records, bank statements showing my disciplined saving pattern, and mortgage application materials proving I had no co-signers or financial assistance with the down payment. My boss, Alan, was surprisingly understanding when I briefly explained the situation. "Family financial disputes can be uglier than divorces," he said with a sympathetic wince. "Take whatever time you need and let me know if you need me to testify about your earnings and work history." My colleagues stepped up to cover my projects during my absences, offering support in ways that highlighted the contrast between chosen family and biological ties. Michael spent evenings helping me organize documentation and weekends distracting me from the looming court date with hikes and simple pleasures that required no financial outlay. Katie, now working night shifts, would come over during her days off to help sort through old financial records and provide emotional support. "Your parents' behavior says everything about them and nothing about you," she reminded me regularly. "This isn't your fault." Despite this support network, the psychological toll mounted. I began experiencing anxiety symptoms, insomnia, loss of appetite, difficulty concentrating at work. The home I had worked so hard to obtain no longer felt like the sanctuary I had envisioned. Each creak and settling sound in the night became my parents' footsteps coming to take away what I had earned. At Jennifer's recommendation, I began seeing Dr. Patel, a therapist specializing in family trauma. Our sessions revealed patterns I had normalized, but were actually deeply dysfunctional. "What you're describing is financial abuse," she explained during our second session. "Your parents' control of your earnings as a minor, their attempts to monitor your accounts as an adult, and now this lawsuit all reflect a pattern of using money as a tool for control rather than respecting your autonomy." This framework helped me understand my parents' behavior, but it didn't lessen the pain of their betrayal. The lawsuit felt like the final confirmation that they viewed me not as a daughter to love, but as an investment to exploit. Nights were the hardest when defenses weakened and doubts crept in. Had I been ungrateful? Did I truly owe them something for raising me? Was there some moral debt beyond legal obligations? Dr. Patel helped me work through these questions, distinguishing between genuine gratitude and obligatory compliance, between healthy family interdependence and toxic entitlement. "Children don't ask to be born," she reminded me. "Parents choose to have children and are legally obligated to provide for them until adulthood. Love should be unconditional, not an invoice to be paid." As the court date approached, my anxiety peaked. Jennifer was confident in our legal position, but warned me about the emotional aspects of the proceeding. "They'll likely make claims that feel personally attacking. Remember that the court is concerned with legal facts, not emotional appeals. Try to remain factual and calm no matter what they say." The night before the hearing, I sat in my backyard, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. This small patch of earth represented everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made, every extra shift I had taken, every social event I had declined. It was more than property. It was the physical manifestation of my independence from the financial manipulation I had endured since childhood. As darkness fell, I made a promise to myself, regardless of the court's decision, I would no longer allow my parents' distorted relationship with money to dictate my worth or happiness. Their lawsuit had severed the remaining threads of our relationship, but perhaps that clean break was necessary for my healing to truly begin. Tomorrow would determine whether I kept my home, but today I had already reclaimed my sense of self-worth from their toxic grasp. The county courthouse was an imposing structure of granite and marble, its formal architecture, a physical reminder of the serious nature of legal proceedings. I arrived 90 minutes early at Jennifer's recommendation, dressed in a conservative navy suit that projected professionalism and stability. Michael and Katie sat in the gallery for moral support, while my parents and their attorney occupied the opposite side of the courtroom, pointedly avoiding eye contact. My father wore his court suit, the same one he wore to funerals and other somber occasions. My mother had chosen a subdued floral dress that made her appear more vulnerable and maternal than her usual style. Their presentation was clearly calculated to reinforce their narrative as sacrificing parents wronged by an ungrateful daughter. Judge Harriet Morales, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and penetrating eyes, called the court to order precisely on time. After reviewing the case documents, she looked between the two parties with an expression that suggested she had seen similar family disputes before and found them all equally troubling. Before we proceed, she began, I want to clarify that family disagreements about money are best resolved through mediation rather than litigation. Has mediation been attempted in this matter? My parents' attorney, Mr. Donovan, rose quickly. Your Honor, the defendants rejected all attempts at private resolution, leaving my clients no choice but to seek judicial remedy. Jennifer countered immediately. That's not accurate, Your Honor. The plaintiff's idea of resolution was demanding 50% of my client's home value with no legal basis. There was no good faith negotiation offered. Judge Morales nodded, making a note before continuing. I understand. Let's proceed with opening statements then. Plaintiff first. Mr. Donovan presented my parents' case with practiced emotional manipulation. He described them as devoted parents who had invested everything in their only child, sacrificing their own financial security to provide me with opportunities. He claimed they had foregone homeownership themselves to direct resources toward my development and education. According to their narrative, my success was directly attributable to their sacrifices, and my refusal to share the fruits of that success constituted unjust enrichment. The plaintiffs are not asking for anything beyond fair compensation for their substantial investment in the defendant's future, he concluded. They supported her for 18 years, and now they simply seek a reasonable return on that investment in their retirement years. When Jennifer's turn came, her approach was factual and methodical. She outlined my financial independence since age 18, documenting how I had worked multiple jobs while carrying a full course load in college. She highlighted that I had received zero financial contribution from my parents for education, housing, or any other expenses since high school graduation. Most importantly, she emphasized that the house had been purchased entirely with my earned income after 12 years of careful saving. Your Honor, there is no legal basis for the plaintiff's claim, she stated clearly. Parents have a legal obligation to support minor children without expectation of repayment. Miss Johnson purchased her home with funds she earned and saved herself with no financial contribution from the plaintiffs. Furthermore, we will demonstrate that, far from supporting her financially, The plaintiffs actually took substantial portions of Miss Johnson's own earned income during her teenage years under the guise of saving it for her education money, which was never returned or accounted for. Judge Morales seemed particularly interested in this last point, making additional notes before gesturing for the testimony phase to begin. My parents went first, each taking the stand to detail their version of my upbringing, with emphasis on their financial sacrifices. My father presented spreadsheets documenting estimated costs of raising me, while my mother provided emotional testimony about forgoing vacations and luxury items to provide for my needs. During cross-examination, Jennifer methodically dismantled their narrative. She questioned my father about the 70% family contribution he had required from my teenage earnings, asking where those funds had gone and why they had never been returned. She pressed my mother about their frequent vacations and her designer handbag collection, which contradicted their claims of financial hardship. Most effectively, she had them confirm that they had provided zero financial support for my college education, despite claiming it as part of their investment. When my turn came to testify, Jennifer guided me through my financial journey. I described working multiple jobs throughout college while maintaining a high GPA, the scholarships and financial aid I had secured independently, and the disciplined saving regimen I had followed for 12 years to afford my home. I provided bank statements showing regular deposits from legitimate employers and the gradual growth of my savings through consistent contributions rather than large gifts or windfalls. The most powerful testimony, however, came from unexpected allies. Professor Anthony Wilson had traveled 3 hours to appear as a character witness, testifying about my academic excellence despite working multiple jobs and confirming that I had received no parental financial support during college. Nicole was one of my most dedicated students, he stated firmly. She often came to class exhausted from overnight shifts, yet maintained exceptional grades through sheer determination. She mentioned several times that she was entirely self-supporting, as her parents believed financial independence was an important life lesson. Mrs. Castillo, my former high school neighbor, testified about observing me, leaving for early morning jobs before school, and working late evening shifts throughout my teenage years. I would see her waiting for the bus in her grocery store uniform at 5:30 in the morning on weekends, she recalled. No 16-year-old works those hours unless they have to. The most damaging testimony for my parents' case came from Mr. Peterson, the manager of my high school grocery store job. He had kept meticulous records and remembered me specifically because of an unusual situation. Nicole's father came to me, asking that we direct deposit her checks to an account he controlled, Mr. Peterson explained. I refused as it's company policy to pay minor employees directly unless legally required otherwise. He was quite insistent about having control over her earnings. As the testimony continued, Judge Morales's expression grew increasingly concerned when hearing about my parents' financial control tactics. The turning point came during redirect examination of my father, when Jennifer asked about specific investments made with my college fund. You testified earlier that you invested Nicole's college fund for her benefit, Jennifer began. Can you provide documentation of these investments and their current value? My father shifted uncomfortably. Those records would be difficult to locate after so many years. Did you maintain separate accounts for these funds, or were they commingled with your personal finances? We maintained a unified investment approach for efficiency. So you deposited Nicole's earnings into your own accounts. For management purposes, yes. And when Nicole needed this money for college, you told her it was unavailable. Where exactly were these funds at that time? My father's composure finally cracked. We had household expenses. We provided for her for 18 years. That money was compensation for all we'd invested in her. The courtroom fell silent at this outburst. Judge Morales leaned forward, her expression stern. Mr. Johnson, are you testifying that you appropriated your daughter's earnings for your own use while telling her you were saving them for her education? My father's subsequent attempt to backpedal only worsened his position. By the time Jennifer finished her, questioning the true nature of my parents' financial relationship with me was painfully clear to everyone in the courtroom. After a brief recess, Judge Morales delivered her ruling with barely contained disapproval. The court finds no legal basis for the plaintiff's claim of entitlement to the defendant's property. Parents have a legal obligation to support minor children without expectation of financial return. The evidence clearly shows that Miss Johnson purchased her home with funds she earned independently without contribution from the plaintiffs. She continued with a pointed addendum. Furthermore, the evidence suggests the plaintiffs may have inappropriately converted the defendant's teenage earnings to their own use under false pretenses. While that matter is beyond the scope of today's proceedings, the court notes that Miss Johnson would likely have grounds for her own claim regarding those funds should she choose to pursue it. The case was dismissed with prejudice, meaning my parents could not refile the same claim. Judge Morales also took the unusual step of ordering my parents to pay my legal fees, citing the frivolous and vexatious nature of their lawsuit. As the courtroom began to empty, I remained seated, overcome with conflicting emotions. The legal victory felt hollow against the finality of the family rupture it represented. My parents left without speaking to me, my father's face rigid with anger, my mother refusing to meet my eyes. I had won the case and kept my home, but lost any possibility of reconciliation with the people who should have been celebrating my achievement rather than trying to claim it as their own. As Jennifer packed her briefcase, she offered a perspective that would help shape my path forward. Family should lift you up, not tear you down. Sometimes the healthiest family is the one you choose, not the one you're born into. Looking at Michael and Katie waiting supportively by the door, I realized the truth in her words. The family that had truly supported me wasn't the one suing me for my achievements, but the one celebrating them. The days following the court case were a storm of contradictory emotions. Relief that my home remained securely mine, warred with grief over the final destruction of my family relationships. Vindication at the judge's ruling competed with lingering doubts about whether I could have somehow prevented this outcome. The legal battle was over, but the emotional aftermath had just begun. The first week, I threw myself into physical labor around the house, painting walls and assembling furniture until exhaustion forced me to sleep. It was easier to focus on tangible improvements than to process the reality that my parents had literally sued me for daring to achieve financial independence on my terms. Each improvement to the house became both an act of defiance and healing, a statement that this space was mine despite their attempts to claim it. "You know you don't have to do everything at once," Michael remarked gently one evening, finding me obsessively sanding cabinet doors at midnight. "The house isn't going anywhere. Neither am I." His steady presence became my anchor in those first turbulent weeks. He understood when I needed space and when I needed company, bringing takeout on evenings, when cooking felt overwhelming, and quietly working on his laptop nearby when I couldn't bear to be alone with my thoughts. Without pressuring me for commitment or decisions about our relationship, he simply showed up, consistently proving through actions rather than words that not everyone who loves you keeps a ledger of what they're owed in return. Katie organized a small housewarming gathering a month after the court case, inviting only people who knew the situation and supported me unconditionally. Professor Wilson came bearing a houseplant, and wisdom your parents taught you who not to become. That's a valuable lesson, though not the one they intended. My colleagues brought practical gifts and left discussions of work at the office. For a few hours, laughter filled the rooms that had witnessed only stress and tears in recent weeks. As summer progressed, I began attending a support group for adults with dysfunctional family relationships. Hearing others share experiences of parental manipulation, control, and betrayal helped normalize my own situation. I wasn't alone in having parents who viewed children as investments rather than individuals to nurture. I wasn't uniquely ungrateful or defective for setting boundaries and protecting myself. Family estrangement is sometimes the healthiest option, the group facilitator explained during one particularly difficult session. Continuing toxic relationships out of obligation only perpetuates harmful patterns. Sometimes love means walking away until real change occurs, even if that change never comes. Gradually, I began transforming my house into a true home, one room at a time. The living room became a gathering space for game nights with friends. The kitchen, once a source of anxiety about frugality and scarcity, became a place of experimentation and abundance, as I learned to cook meals that nourished rather than merely sustained. The backyard sprouted a small vegetable garden, each growing plant a symbol of patience and care. Most significantly, I converted the spare bedroom from a hastily arranged home office into a multi-purpose space that reflected my evolving priorities. One corner housed a comfortable reading chair beside bookshelves filled with financial wisdom I wished I'd had access to in my youth. Another held a desk for creative projects rather than just work. The walls displayed photographs of chosen family and achievements that made me proud, creating a visual reminder of how far I'd come. 6 months after the court case, I received an unexpected letter from my mother. Inside was not the apology I might have hoped for, but a request to meet and put the unpleasantness behind us. There was no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no indication that anything fundamental had changed in their perspective. After discussing it with Dr. Patel, I responded with clear boundaries. I would consider rebuilding a relationship only after they demonstrated understanding of why their actions were harmful and respected my autonomy going forward. Their response was telling in its absence. My boundaries were apparently too high a price for reconciliation. While the finality of this realization brought fresh grief, it also brought clarity. I couldn't change my parents, or make them see me as a person rather than a possession. I could only change how I responded to them and what I allowed in my life. As the 1-year anniversary of homeownership approached, Michael surprised me with a custom doormat reading "Earned, Not Given." That small gesture of understanding brought tears to my eyes and crystallized the most profound lesson of this painful journey. True security comes not from what others provide, but from what we build ourselves, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. The financial wisdom I gained through this experience became something I felt compelled to share. With encouragement from Professor Wilson, I began volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic financial literacy to young adults aging out of foster care and others without family financial guidance. Helping these young people understand healthy financial boundaries and practical skills for independence became a way to transform my pain into purpose. "You explain this stuff differently," one participant told me, after a workshop on building credit responsibly. "Like you actually get how scary it is to figure out money when no one taught you right." That comment led to more workshops, eventually expanding into a regular series sponsored by local credit unions. The curriculum I developed specifically addressed financial independence for those with challenging family dynamics, covering not just practical skills, but also the emotional and psychological aspects of money that traditional financial education often overlooks. Today, my house is fully mine in every sense. The mortgage payments represent freedom, not burden. Each room reflects choices made from desire rather than deprivation. The financial discipline that once felt like a prison of necessity has transformed into a tool for creating the life I truly want, not one dictated by others' expectations or demands. Michael and I are now engaged planning a future that honors both togetherness and independence. We're discussing combining households while maintaining healthy financial boundaries, creating a partnership built on mutual respect rather than control or obligation. The lessons learned from my parents' example serve as a constant reminder of the relationship dynamics we explicitly choose to avoid. The most profound change, however, has been internal. I no longer seek validation or approval from people incapable of providing it. I recognize that family is defined by mutual care and respect, not merely by blood relation. Most importantly, I understand that love doesn't keep a balance sheet, and true gifts come without invoices attached. If you're watching this and struggling with similar family dynamics around money or control, please know you're not alone. Establishing healthy boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential for your well-being. Your achievements belong to you, and no one is entitled to claim them as their own. Have you experienced financial control or manipulation from family members? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more authentic conversations about navigating difficult family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, your worth isn't measured by what others can take from you, but by what you choose to build for yourself.